Hello, in this video, I'm going to share some suggestions for how to select and store and prepare cauliflower, and I'll provide some recipe ideas as well, some things that you can look for if you want to enjoy cauliflower now while it's in season locally, as well as what you can do to save it for later. Since locally grown produce, as I've said in other videos, is the most nutritious option if you can get it. It's just had less time to travel and lose its nutrients along the way. As far as selecting cauliflower is concerned, most cauliflower is white. I will mention other kinds of cauliflower that you can get locally that are purple and yellow, orange colors, but most cauliflower is white, and you do want it to be white. If it's turning kind of a brown or a grayish color, it's losing its nutrients. And if it's got black spots on it, then there's something that's growing that you want to get rid of. A little bit of that is not a big deal. You can just cut that off. But if you see a lot of it, you probably want to avoid that particular head of cauliflower if you can. If you've got it already and that's happened, you can still salvage probably, but when you're selecting to start, you probably want to pick something else. And then if you're storing it raw, store it in a plastic bag, a loosely opened plastic bag that allows it to breathe. And it can stay that way as a whole head in the crisper drawer for 7 to 10 days. If you cut it or buy it pre-cut, maybe 4 days max before you want to do something with it. When you are ready to use the cauliflower, you should cut it to whatever your desired thickness is, depending on what the recipe calls for and what you plan to do with it. But when I first get the cauliflower off of the head, I usually try to cut along the natural stems as much as possible. And even once I'm cutting into smaller pieces, I will still cut that way as much as possible. You just lose more of it when you cut it in places where it's not naturally divided. And then, like most other produce, I recommend soaking it in a solution of vinegar and cold water for several minutes. You don't need to soak it for very long because cauliflower is not one of those supposed dirty vegetables that retains pesticides. We don't really treat it with a lot of pesticides usually. It has its own anti-pest agent, which is what makes it stink when it's cold after it's been cooked. And even just a little bit before it's been cooked, when it's cold, it has that cruciferous vegetable smell to it that some people don't like. And that's warding off pests. So we don't need to be treating it with chemicals like we do with some of the sweeter and more colorful produce. Rinse it and drain it for 30 seconds and it's ready to go. This is a head of cauliflower I got last Friday from a local farmer. And there was really only one place where there was any brown, which you can probably see here. So this was a really nice, healthy head of cauliflower. I'll just cut that off before I do anything with it and cook it later. And you can see I haven't chopped it into pieces yet for cooking. I've cut it naturally along the stem, but I'll try then later to cut here where the cauliflower naturally divides itself as much as possible. And then I'll cut it more if I need to get to the size that I need. You might also see that this cauliflower underneath has a slightly green tinge to it. There's nothing wrong with that. That just happens because of the natural environment that it's grown in. Certain kinds of nutrients in the cauliflower will come out just a little bit more. It is a cruciferous vegetable, so there's some green from the leaves, and the natural environment can cause some of that green to come out a bit more at times. So nothing wrong with that. It's really just those black and brown spots that don't belong, that really stand out, that you want to watch for. When you're ready to cook your cauliflower is a vegetable that has nutrients that are water soluble, which means that if you cook it in water, you want to be careful about not overcooking it because it will lose its nutrients into the water if you boil it or even if you steam it. Steaming less so, boiling would be the worst because it's immersed completely in the water. One thing you can do if you're cooking your broccoli in your cauliflower in water, whether you're blanching it to freeze for later or you're just cooking it to eat, you can put a pinch of baking soda in the water. That will help to prevent the cauliflower from losing the water-soluble nutrients. You still want to be careful about overcooking, but you can use the baking soda to help it stay healthier and more nutritious. It will also lose some nutrients if you cook it in oil, but it's not going to lose as much. Every kind of produce, as I've said before, is going to lose some nutrients when you cook it, but cooking in oil, not deep frying, but roasting or pan frying or sauteing, stir frying, these kinds of things where there's just a light amount of oil and it's not completely immersed in hot oil will help to retain as many nutrients as you can keep if you're cooking your cauliflower. So you can also get purple and orange varieties of cauliflower. The orange is usually called a cheddar cauliflower. And as far as these are concerned, the purple, just like most other produce that is purple, that purple color is from what's called anthocyanins, and they are water soluble. So you're going to lose purple the longer you cook your cauliflower in water. And so do what I have already recommended if you want to cook your cauliflower in water and keep as much purple as possible. Use that pinch of baking soda. Orange, the cheddar cauliflower, is orange from beta carotene, just like carrots and sweet potatoes. And that beta carotene is actually fat soluble. So if you boil or steam or blanch your cheddar cauliflower, you won't lose the beta carotene. You'll still lose some of the other nutrients, though again, if you're careful and you put it in some water and don't overcook it and use the baking soda, you'll have the best of all situations for keeping the nutrients that are there. And as I've said before, when you buy locally, it starts out with more nutrients in the first place because it hasn't lost any through the long distribution process. So even if you lose some in your cooking, you're still going to have a pretty nutritious food. One other thing, I've mentioned blanching in previous videos, so I won't go on a protracted discussion of it, but if you want to freeze your cauliflower and cook it later, you can blanch it. I would recommend blanching for about 2 to 4 minutes, depending on how thick the pieces are. If you use bigger pieces, closer to 4 minutes. And if you cut the cauliflower very small, then probably more like 2 to 3 minutes. You cook it, you boil it in some hot water, and then put it in a cold bath of water for the same amount of time that you cooked it. Let it drain and dry, and then put it in a freezer safe bag or other container for longer term storage. And then it won't be fully cooked, but it will be ready for you to cook later. It will lose a little bit of its crunch. Everything that's frozen loses some crunch, but it will still have its nutrients. And it's something that you can use later when the cauliflower is no longer in season locally, or when you just need something quick to pull from the freezer and throw into the soup or whatever else you're cooking. So the recipe suggestions I have today are actually ones I've shared in other videos, but I'm pulling them out here to highlight along with my discussion of cauliflower. One thing, if you like barbecue, you can make a barbecue cauliflower recipe that calls for you to cook the cauliflower in oil, so it's going to stay pretty nutritious. And it's just a light amount of oil because you end up roasting it. You cook it a little bit in the pot, and then you roast it the rest of the time in a little oil and seasoning. So it's very easy. Cut the cauliflower to the size that you want. If you're going to eat it, cut bite-sized, you can cut it to bite-sized pieces. You can cut it slightly larger if you want. It might take a little longer to roast if you're going to cook it a little longer. But you basically stir together oil, lemon juice, some barbecue rub, which you can get different kinds if you have your favorite, or if you don't have one that you like, you can throw together what I've recommended here: a tablespoon of chili powder, a tablespoon of paprika, and depending on how sweet you like your barbecue, you can add 1 to 3 teaspoons of brown sugar. And then also add a pinch or more of cayenne if you'd like it to have a kick, or if your barbecue rub already has a kick to it and you don't need the cayenne, you can keep that out, and a pinch or more of black pepper, and then salt to taste. It really depends on whether or not the rub you're using has any salt added. The chili powder I use doesn't have salt added, so I can go ahead and add salt to things when I cook. But if you have a seasoning that has some salt added already, adjust accordingly. So you need to preheat the oven, and then you cook the cauliflower first on the stove top for a few minutes until it starts to get tender, and then put it in the oven on a baking sheet and roast it for about 30 more minutes. Test it and see, get it to your desired tenderness. It will lose a little bit of nutrients because it's cooking, but it's not boiling for an extended period of time. And this is a really flavorful recipe. You can make it as hot as you'd like or as sweet as you'd like, depending on how you like your barbecue flavors. Another option that I've shared before is buffalo cauliflower. And if you do this, you can mix together some hot sauce with some garlic powder, salt, and olive oil. And you bake everything. This time you don't need to cook it on the stove top first. You just bake it until it is tender. And you can serve it with a dipping sauce like ranch, or you can eat it by itself. Both of these recipes are nice if you're looking for something with a nice different kind of flavor to them than just plain cauliflower that you want to serve with something else like some grilled meat or seafood. Or if you just are having a kind of buffet type thing and you want to have some options for hot food that are a little bit different but also healthy. One thing about cauliflower is it's very good at absorbing the flavors of other foods. So cauliflower by itself, if you're not keen on its flavor, it's not necessarily that interesting on its own. So especially if you didn't grow up eating it, you may not have developed a taste for it, but it is great in different kinds of things because it will absorb the flavors of the different seasonings. So I really like it in Indian food because Indian food is spicy. So cauliflower is great for absorbing flavors in Indian foods. I have shared this recipe before as well in another video, and so I'm not going to show you necessarily how to make it. It's fairly straightforward. If you have the ingredients, then it's a pretty easy dish to make. You can adjust things according to your own preferences. If you don't want a very hot dish, you can avoid the chili, or you can remove the seeds or use a very mild chili. If you aren't sure about sharp spices, the cumin and the turmeric are the sharpest of the spices in this recipe. So you could always reduce them a bit and maybe do 1/8 or 1/4 of a teaspoon of turmeric and maybe just a 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. Coriander is a bit sweeter in flavor, and chili powder, you probably have a chili powder that you like, which is going to provide a nice base for this flavor wise. And so you basically cook this in the stove, on the stove top. This one doesn't go on in the oven. And once it's done, you can serve it with another Indian dish, or you can serve it with some grilled meat or seafood, whatever you like. It can, again, spice up your dinner, and it gives you an option for something that provides you with some potatoes if you want potatoes, but it also adds the cauliflower in for some extra nutrients. So those are my recipe suggestions. I eat a lot of Indian food with cauliflower. That is my absolute favorite way to eat cauliflower. I also like it in soups, especially soups that have a nice kick to them. You can add them to your own soup recipes if you'd like. It doesn't have to be a recipe that has a kick. If it just has some nice herbs and seasoning to give it a nice rich soup flavor, you can add it to that and it will be great in that. And then there are a lot of vegan and vegetarian cookbooks that do different things with cauliflower that you might not have thought about before. You can find these things on the internet, but you can also check out library books. One that I recommend that you can get through Cumberland County is called Love Real Food. This has a number of cauliflower recipes in it, but one that might be interesting and worth checking out is a cauliflower pita recipe where you roast vegetables, and cauliflower is one of them, and you eat it with some hummus. You can, of course, have meat if you'd like, but this is a totally vegetarian and vegan cookbook. There are some recipes that are fully vegan friendly, others are vegetarian friendly. And you can just try cauliflower maybe in a different way than what you've thought of in the past with some nice seasonings. Another similar kind of cookbook is Simple Green Meals, which also has vegetarian and vegan recipes in it. And this one has a taco recipe with cauliflower, another one you might not have thought of. So I recommend looking at this one. I own both of these cookbooks, actually. All of the ones that I'm recommending today, except for maybe one, I have in my own cookbook collection because I use them again and again. This book I do not own, but partly because it's an expensive cookbook, but you can get it from the library, and this has some nice recipes in it. One that I specifically recommend is a cauliflower soup. That's all it's called. It's called cauliflower soup. So if you look in the index, you'll find it easily. And if you like Indian food, this is a great soup because the cauliflower it makes it hearty, but it also makes it, the Indian spices just make it really flavorful. And then if you're interested in more East Asian cultures, then there's another cookbook I recommend that you can also get from the library called Farm to Table Asian Secrets. This is all vegan and vegetarian also. I'm not trying to turn you vegan or vegetarian. I'm just trying to give you some suggestions of ways you might make cauliflower that are different than just steaming it and eating it alongside meat and potatoes like I did when I was growing up. Some things that are just different and worth trying. So there are a number of recipes in here, including stir fry type recipes, but the one that I have tried specifically that I recommend is a mixed vegetable yellow curry that has some influence from Indian curry recipes. So that is everything. I hope that there is something that you found interesting and that you're able to enjoy the local cauliflower while it's in season.